I'm going to tell you the most insane story of betrayal, manipulation, and the most unexpected revenge that literally saved my life. My name is Marina. I'm 38 years old, and I was married to a successful lawyer named Richard for 12 years. Everyone thought we were the perfect couple. Big house, fancy cars, social events every weekend where we looked like relationship goals. But behind closed doors, I was living in absolute hell. And I had no idea how deep his betrayal actually went until the day I almost lost everything. What you're about to hear will make you understand that sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who sleep next to you every night. This man systematically destroyed my self-worth, isolated me from everyone I loved, and planned to take away my children while making me look like a crazy woman. Before I continue with this story that's going to leave you completely speechless, please subscribe to the channel and hit that like button right now. This is super important because YouTube's algorithm needs to know you enjoy this type of real content so I can bring you more incredible true stories like this one. I've been getting so many messages from women who are going through similar situations, and your engagement helps me reach more people who need to hear these stories. Tell me in the comments, have you ever been in a controlling relationship or know someone who has? Because what I'm about to tell you shows that sometimes salvation comes from the most unexpected places. Stay with me because when I tell you about the recordings his secretary had been making for 3 years, you're going to lose your mind. Let me start from the beginning so you understand how I got trapped in this nightmare that nearly destroyed my entire life. Richard and I met when I was 26. He was this incredibly charming, successful lawyer who swept me off my feet with expensive dinners and weekend getaways. He was 8 years older, had this confident way of talking about his cases, and made me feel like I was the luckiest woman in the world to be chosen by him. We had what everyone called a fairy tale wedding with 200 guests, moved into a beautiful house in the best neighborhood, and for the first year, I genuinely thought I had won the lottery in love. Everyone said we were the perfect couple, and I believed it too, because he was so attentive and romantic in public. But you know what they say, if something seems too good to be true, it probably is, and boy was I about to learn that lesson the hard way. The control started so slowly and subtly that I didn't even notice I was being manipulated until I was completely trapped. It began with small comments about my friends that seemed like caring observations. Sarah seems really jealous of our relationship. Maybe you shouldn't hang out with her so much. It's not healthy for you. Then it was about my family. Your mom is always trying to interfere in our marriage. Don't you think we need some space from her? Within 6 months, he had convinced me that my friends were toxic and my family was intrusive. By our second anniversary, I had basically cut ties with everyone who cared about me, thinking I was protecting my marriage. The financial control came next. He convinced me to quit my job because a successful man's wife shouldn't have to work, and I make enough money for both of us. Just focus on making our home beautiful. I was so naive and in love that I thought this was romantic, instead of recognizing it as the first step in making me completely dependent on him. The psychological abuse was constant, but so sophisticated that I thought I was losing my mind instead of recognizing that he was deliberately driving me crazy. He would move my keys, my phone, my jewelry, and then when I couldn't find them, he'd say things like, "Marina, you're becoming so forgetful. Maybe you should see a doctor about your memory." He would make plans with me, and then later insist we never made those plans, making me question my own sanity. When I would get upset about his behavior, he'd say, "You're being emotional again," or "I'm worried about your mental state. Normal wives don't react like this." The gaslighting was so constant and so subtle that after a few years, I genuinely believed there was something wrong with my brain. I started writing things down to remember them, but then he'd find my notes and say, "See, you're so paranoid you're writing down conversations that never happened." I was living in a constant state of confusion and self-doubt, walking on eggshells in my own home. For 10 long years, I lived in this prison he had created for me, and the only light in my darkness were our 2 beautiful children, Emma and Lucas. Having kids with him was the biggest mistake. The breaking point came exactly 13 months ago. And I remember the date because it was the day my real life finally began. I was in the kitchen making breakfast on a Saturday morning
watching Emma and Lucas laugh over their pancakes, when I suddenly realized that my children were growing up thinking this toxic dynamic was what marriage looked like. I looked at Richard, reading his newspaper with that smug expression he always had, and something inside me just snapped. I walked over to him and said, "Richard, I can't do this anymore. I want a divorce." The newspaper slowly lowered, and the smile disappeared from his face so fast it was absolutely terrifying. He looked at me with pure hatred and said in this ice-cold voice, "Marina, you have no idea what you just started. You'll regret this decision for the rest of your pathetic life, and you'll lose everything: the house, the kids, your dignity. I'll make sure of it." What happened in the weeks following that conversation was like something out of a psychological thriller movie. Within days, I discovered that Richard had been preparing for this exact moment for years, maybe even from the beginning of our marriage. He had systematically transferred most of our assets to offshore accounts that I never knew existed, using his legal expertise to hide money in ways I couldn't even understand. When I tried to access our joint checking account, I found out it had been emptied and closed. When I went to the bank, they told me that, according to their records, I had never been an authorized user on most of our accounts. He had been recording our conversations for years and had edited them to make me sound unstable, angry, and potentially dangerous to our children. He even had medical records that he had somehow falsified, suggesting that I had been treated for mental health issues that made me unfit to be a mother. I was in complete shock when I realized the scope of his preparation and how long he had been planning to destroy me. When I confronted him about the missing money, he just laughed and said, "What money? That was always my money, Marina. You never contributed anything to this family except drama and instability." I felt like I was drowning because I understood that every loving gesture, every romantic moment, every time he called me beautiful had been part of this long-term plan to isolate and control me. The man I had loved for 12 years had been my enemy from day one, and I had been too trusting and naive to see it. He had spent over a decade positioning me as the unstable wife while he played the role of the long-suffering husband, and now he was ready to execute his plan to take everything from me while making it look justified. But the most devastating part of his strategy was what he was doing to Emma and Lucas, and this is where he crossed a line that still makes me sick to think about. He started systematically poisoning them against me, telling them that Mommy was sick and might have to go away for treatment. He would have private conversations with them about how worried he was about my behavior and how they needed to be honest if anyone asked them questions about our home life. Emma, who was only 8 years old, came to me crying one day and asked, "Mommy, are you really crazy like Daddy says? Are you going to hurt us?" That moment broke my heart into a million pieces because I realized he was using our children as weapons against me. Lucas, who was 6, started flinching when I tried to hug him because Richard had convinced him that I was unpredictable and dangerous. I knew then that I had to fight back with everything I had. But the problem was, he had taken everything: my money, my support system, my confidence, and now my own children's trust. The divorce proceedings were an absolute nightmare that made me understand why people say the legal system is rigged against victims of abuse. Richard had hired the most expensive and ruthless divorce attorneys in the city, and I could barely afford basic legal representation with the little money I had managed to save secretly. Every piece of evidence I tried to present, he had a sophisticated counter-argument for because he understood the legal system better than anyone. The edited recordings he played in court made me sound like a completely unhinged woman who screamed at her children and threatened her husband. His team had medical experts who testified that I showed clear signs of being an unfit mother based on the falsified records he had created. My own lawyer, who I later suspected wasn't really fighting for me, kept suggesting that I accept a settlement that would leave me with almost nothing and limited supervised visitation with my kids. I was sitting in that courtroom day after day, watching this man who had controlled and abused me for years about to legally steal my children and my entire future.
I was losing everything, and there seemed to be nothing I could do to stop it because he had been planning this for so much longer than I had been fighting it. The judge was clearly believing his version of events because he had documentation for everything, while I just had my word against his. His lawyers painted me as a gold digger who had married him for money and was now trying to destroy his reputation with false accusations because I couldn't handle being divorced. They said I was mentally unstable, financially irresponsible, and potentially dangerous to my own children. My lawyer kept telling me to accept the settlement because we were going to lose everything if we went to trial. I was facing the very real possibility of losing custody of Emma and Lucas while being left with nothing to rebuild my life. At 38 years old, I was about to become a broken woman with supervised visits to see my own children, because the man who had spent 12 years destroying my self-worth was about to finish the job in court. The day of the final hearing arrived, and I woke up knowing that this might be the last day I would ever have any real relationship with my children. I was sitting outside the courtroom in this cheap dress I had bought at a thrift store because I couldn't afford anything else, feeling like my life was over. I was thinking about how I would explain to Emma and Lucas why Mommy couldn't live with them anymore and why they would only see me a few hours a week under supervision. I was crying and probably looked exactly as unstable as Richard had been claiming I was when someone sat down next to me on the bench. I looked up and was surprised to see Linda, Richard's secretary, sitting there in her usual professional attire. She had worked for him for 5 years, and I had always thought she didn't like me because she was so cold and formal whenever I called the office or stopped by. She was this quiet, serious woman in her early 30s who barely ever spoke to me beyond basic pleasantries, so I was shocked when she chose to sit next to me. But then Linda leaned over and whispered something that made my heart stop and changed the entire course of my life. "Mrs. Marina, I need to talk to you urgently. He doesn't know that I know everything, but I've been recording him for 3 years. She pulled a small flash drive from her purse and pressed it into my hand, looking around nervously to make sure no one was watching us. "This contains enough evidence to destroy him completely. I'm sorry I waited so long to come forward, but I was terrified of what he might do to me. After today, I'm quitting and starting over somewhere else where he can't find me." I stared at this woman, who I thought was just a loyal employee, and I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She explained quickly that she had started recording Richard 3 years ago when she overheard him on the phone with me, screaming and calling me horrible names that no husband should ever use. She said she realized then that he was abusing me emotionally and psychologically, and she started documenting everything because she was afraid he might escalate to physical violence. She had been building a case against him for 3 years, and now she was giving me the key to my freedom. But these weren't just recordings of him being mean to me. What Linda had captured was so much worse and more criminal than I could have imagined. She had recorded conversations between Richard and his accountant about hiding assets in offshore accounts to avoid taxes and keep money away from me in the divorce. She had audio of him bragging to his law partners about how he was going to leave Marina with nothing and make her look like a psychotic woman who imagined the whole marriage. She had recordings of him coordinating with his own divorce attorney to fabricate evidence against me and coaching witnesses to lie about my behavior. Most shocking of all, she had recorded him coaching Emma and Lucas on what to say if anyone asked them about Mommy, telling them that I was sick and that they needed to protect Daddy by being honest about how scary I could be. The flash drive contained over 50 hours of recordings that proved everything: the financial fraud, the psychological abuse, the manipulation of our children, and the conspiracy to destroy me in court. The most devastating recording was just 2 weeks before this final hearing, and when Linda described it to me, I felt both rage and relief wash over me at the same time. Richard was on the phone with one of his mistresses, and apparently there had been multiple women throughout our marriage, laughing about how I was finally falling apart completely and how he had been planning this perfect destruction for years. In the recording, he actually said, "Marina is so stupid and trusting that she never saw it coming. By the time I'm done with her, she'll be lucky to see her kids once a month, and she'll be living in some tiny apartment wondering how she lost everything. The best part is that everyone will think she brought it on herself by being crazy." He talked about how easy it had been to isolate me from my friends and family, how simple it was to make me question my own sanity, and how the legal system would side with him because he was a respected attorney, while I was just a hysterical housewife with no credibility. Hearing about this recording made me realize that every moment of love I thought we had shared had been a lie. But it also gave me the weapon I needed to fight back.
Linda explained that she had started making these recordings not just to protect me, but to protect herself from the sexual harassment and threats she had been enduring for years. She told me that Richard had been making her life miserable with inappropriate comments, unwanted touching, and threats to destroy her career if she ever complained. She was afraid to report him because he was a powerful lawyer with connections throughout the legal system, and she needed her job to support her elderly mother. But when she witnessed how he was destroying me and manipulating our children, she decided that documenting everything was the only way to protect both of us. She had been living in fear for years, but she couldn't stand by and watch him destroy an innocent family while she had the power to stop it. The recordings became her insurance policy against his threats and my salvation from his systematic destruction of my life. When we went back into the courtroom for what was supposed to be the final session where I would lose everything, Richard was confident and smiling like he had already won. His expensive legal team was preparing to present their closing arguments about why I was an unfit mother who deserved nothing from our marriage. The judge was looking at me with the same skeptical expression I had been seeing for weeks, clearly ready to rule in Richard's favor based on all the evidence they had presented. I could see my children's future slipping away from me as Richard's lawyer stood up to deliver what was supposed to be the final blow that would destroy my life forever. My own lawyer looked defeated and was barely paying attention because he thought the case was already lost. But I was sitting there with that flash drive in my pocket, knowing that everything was about to change in the most dramatic way possible. I stood up and asked the judge for permission to present new evidence that had just come to my attention, and you should have seen the confusion on Richard's face when I walked toward the front of the courtroom. His lawyer immediately objected, claiming that no new evidence could be introduced at this stage of the proceedings, but I explained that this was evidence of criminal activity that was directly relevant to the case. The judge, probably curious about what I could possibly have that would change anything at this point, allowed me to proceed. I walked to the front of that courtroom with that flash drive, looked directly at Richard and said, "Your Honor, I have recordings that prove my husband has been committing fraud, manipulating our children, and lying to this court." The color drained from Richard's face as he realized that his perfect plan was about to fall apart, and he started whispering frantically to his lawyers who clearly had no idea what was happening. The first recording I played was Richard talking to his accountant about transferring money to hidden offshore accounts specifically to avoid giving that gold-digging woman a single penny in the divorce. The courtroom went completely silent except for Richard's voice explaining how to hide assets and falsify financial documents to make it look like our marriage had fewer resources than it actually did. You could hear his accountant warning him that what they were doing was illegal, and Richard laughing and saying, "She's too stupid to figure it out, and even if she does, who's going to believe her against me?" The judge's expression changed completely as he realized that everything Richard had presented about our finances was fraudulent. Richard's lawyers were frantically trying to stop the recording, but the judge ordered them to sit down and let it continue. I had never felt more powerful in my entire life as I watched this man who had controlled me for 12 years finally being exposed for the criminal he really was. Next, I played the recording of him bragging to his friend about how he was going to destroy Marina psychologically and make her question her own reality until she breaks completely. In this conversation, you could hear him laughing about the gaslighting techniques he had been using on me and how easy it was to make me think I was going crazy. He actually said, "I've been moving her things around and denying conversations we've had, and now she writes everything down like a paranoid person. It's perfect for the divorce because she looks unstable."
Then came the audio of him coaching Emma and Lucas to say negative things about me. And this is where the judge actually stopped the recording and called for a recess. You could hear my 8-year-old daughter's innocent voice asking Daddy, "But Daddy, why do I have to say Mommy is mean when she's not mean to me?" And Richard responding, "Because
The final recording I played was the most devastating one. Richard on the phone with his mistress from 2 weeks earlier, celebrating what he thought was going to be his victory over me in court. In this conversation, he detailed his entire plan to destroy me, laughing about how he had isolated me from my support system, controlled my access to money, and systematically destroyed my credibility over the course of 12 years. He said, "Marina has no idea that I've been planning this since our 2nd year of marriage. I've documented every emotional outburst, recorded every argument, and positioned myself as the long-suffering husband of an unstable woman. She'll have nothing left when I'm done with her. No money, no kids, no friends, no credibility. It's the perfect revenge for having to pretend to love her for all these years." The judge stopped this recording too and immediately called for an emergency recess, during which Richard was seen arguing frantically with his lawyers, while I sat there feeling a mixture of vindication and disgust that I had been married to such a monster. When court resumed after the recess, everything had changed completely, and I could see that justice was finally going to be served. The judge demanded that Richard's legal team explain the recordings, but there was no explanation that could justify what everyone in that courtroom had just heard. Richard tried to claim that the recordings were fake or taken out of context, but Linda had saved them with timestamps, metadata, and technical specifications that proved they were completely authentic. The judge ordered an immediate investigation into Richard's financial records and placed a freeze on all his accounts pending criminal charges. His own lawyers were distancing themselves from him as they realized they had been unknowingly part of a criminal conspiracy to defraud the court and commit perjury. What happened next was the most satisfying and vindicating moment of my entire life, and I still get emotional thinking about it. The judge not only awarded me full custody of Emma and Lucas, but also gave me 80% of our assets, including our house, cars, and Richard's retirement accounts. He ordered Richard to pay substantial alimony and child support and banned him from having any unsupervised contact with our children until he completed psychological evaluation and parenting classes. But the best part was that the judge immediately referred the case to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution, and Richard was led out of the courtroom in handcuffs.
Today, 3 years later, my children and I are living our absolute best life. And every single day I wake up grateful for my freedom and for Linda's courage. Emma and Lucas are in therapy to help them process the psychological manipulation they experienced, but they're happy, healthy, and thriving in our peaceful home. We live in the same beautiful house where I was once a prisoner, but now it's filled with laughter, love, and genuine happiness instead of fear and control. I started my own successful consulting business with part of the settlement money, and for the first time in my adult life, I'm financially independent and completely in control of my own decisions. My children see me as a strong, capable woman instead of the broken, confused person Richard had turned me into, and that transformation has been the most rewarding part of this entire journey. The most incredible and life-changing part of this whole nightmare turned into a blessing is that the person I thought was just a cold, unfriendly employee turned out to be the guardian angel who saved my entire family. While I was suffering in silence and isolation, Linda was secretly building the case that would set us free, recording after recording, proof after proof, act of courage after act of courage. She risked her own safety and livelihood to protect people she barely knew because she couldn't stand by and watch evil triumph over innocence. Sometimes your salvation comes from the most unexpected places, and sometimes the people who seem indifferent or distant are actually the ones fighting the hardest battles on your behalf. I want every woman watching this to know that if you're in a controlling or abusive relationship, there is hope, there is help, and there are people who will fight for you even when you can't fight for yourself. Document everything. Reach out for help. Trust your instincts and never give up on yourself, because you deserve so much better than a life of fear and manipulation.